They came in from the dark of the outer system, on a heading that no vessel had used in 48,000 years. I know that because the platform's archive unit told me so, in its flat voice, at 3:17 station time, while I was eating cold rice from a sealed container at my observation post and watching the long sweep of the equatorial band below. Calith 6 had been my station for 11 years. I had stood 4,000 watches on its forward observation gallery, looking down at the blue-white curve of Earth and up at the scatter of the Accord fleet's outer picket line, and in all of that time, I had never heard the archive unit speak unprompted. Its voice through my earpiece was so unexpected that I dropped the container. Rice scattered across the deck plating in the low centrifugal gravity, and I did not pick it up. Sniper first grade Kale, incoming drive signatures on approach vector Theta 11, preliminary match, Vethrak Breed-War signature family, confidence 94.7%, timestamp match in the primary archive, 48,211 years prior, flagging priority amber. I put down my fork. I pulled up the observation window and rotated it to the outer system approach vector. At that range they were not visible, nothing was, at that distance, without the platform's long-range optical array. But the display showed 8 drive contacts, slow-moving, in a loose formation I did not recognize from any current Accord or independent fleet doctrine. The formation looked old. It looked like something drawn by a hand that had learned to move ships through space before our oldest megacities had broken ground. "Confirm classification," I said. "Confirmed. Vethrak Breed-War Collective, 8 vessels. Formation consistent with archival survey approach, not attack approach. Speed, 0.03 standard. Estimated arrival at Earth survey range, 19 hours 41 minutes. I had studied the Vethrak entry in the Accord archive once, during my first posting, the way a new officer studies everything in the archive once, and then files most of it in the place in their memory reserved for things that will never matter. The Vethrak Breed-War Collective was a bioengineering cartel of some scale that had operated, according to the record, in this region of the galaxy before humanity had language. They had seeded worlds the way other civilizations planted crops, dropping tailored biological material onto habitable planets and returning, thousands of years later, to harvest whatever had grown into something useful. Their specialty was combat stock, species bred or modified toward aggression, physical endurance, pain tolerance, tactical instinct. They returned on multi-thousand-year cycles to assess yield, extract the worthwhile strains, and either incorporate them or discard the rest. Earth, according to the archive entry, had been one of their seeding sites. 48,000 years ago, by the Accord's best reconstruction from trace genetic evidence, and from a handful of fragmented transmissions the collective had left in a now-dead star's orbit for their own navigation use, a Vethrak survey fleet had passed through this system, assessed the indigenous population, early humanity, by the record's reckoning, as promising raw material, made what the collective called an enhancement deposit, and departed. The entry noted that no return visit had ever been logged. Until now. I hit the priority amber alert on my console and opened a channel to the watch commander. Then I looked out through the gallery's forward viewport at the dark of the outer system, and I thought about something my training instructor had told me 16 years ago when I was a raw recruit in the Accord Defense Force's orbital sniper program. The difference between a target and a threat is preparation. A target is something you respond to. A threat is something you've already planned for. She had meant it as tactical doctrine. Standing at my post in the cold quiet of Calith 6's observation gallery at 3:17 station time, watching 8 old drive signatures close on Earth's approach vector, I understood for the first time what she had actually been talking about. The Accord fleet did not scramble. It did not need to. By the time I filed my watch log at 400, the Accord's outer monitoring network, The chain of deep system buoys that ran from the Caliph Deep asteroid field out to the system's edge had already been tracking the Vethrak formation for 6 hours. It had flagged them at the outer boundary, confirmed the signature family, and passed the alert to Accord Command while I had still been asleep. The priority amber classification I'd been so proud to transmit had reached a room full of officers who had already been awake for 3 hours, had already run the archive analysis, had already begun moving pieces into place. That is what preparation looks like from the inside. You never see the whole board. By 600, Watch Commander Sarath Aln had called me into the platform's operations center and walked me through what was happening. The Accord diplomatic intercept vessel Caliph Meridian was already on course to meet the Vethrak at the outer approach boundary. A standard protocol intercept, the kind practiced 4 times a year in simulation, and never, in my 11 years on Caliph 6, in reality. The Accord response fleet, 290 vessels, including the capital warships Verath Sovereign, Accord Standing, and Keth Memorial, had begun a repositioning maneuver that would place them behind the shadow of the Caliph Deep asteroid at the inner system's edge, invisible to any sensor array operating from the outer approach vector, within 14 hours. Caliph 6 and the other 11 platforms of the Accord orbital defense ring had gone to full active status at 5:45. I had not noticed, because the transition from stand-down to full active on a ring platform is designed to be invisible from the inside, a quiet thing, like a hand closing. "How long has the repositioning been in the contingency plan?" I asked Watch Commander Aln. He was a large man, patient, with the kind of stillness that comes from 4 decades in the Defense Force. He looked at me for a moment before answering. "The Vethrak contingency has been in the active planning catalog for 11,000 years, he said. "Updated on a rolling 400-year review cycle." I had been stationed on Caliph 6 for 11 years, and I had never heard the word Vethrak spoken aloud in this operations center. The contingency plan for their return had been in the active catalog for 11,000 years. I sat with that for a moment. "The archive unit flagged them at 94.7% confidence, I said. "Why not 100? "Because the archive entry is 48,000 years old, Aln said. "Their vessels have changed. Their drive signatures have drifted. 94.7 is the match with a 48,000-year margin of decay applied." He paused. The Accord's Xenobiological Survey team upgraded the confidence to 99.1 at 5:30, based on the formation geometry and the approach vector. They came back on the exact heading they left on. 48,000 years later, and they came back on the exact heading. He said it without emphasis, and that was what made it land. Not wonder, not alarm, just a fact. They came back on the exact heading, and we were ready. The next 8 hours were the quietest I have ever spent in the operations center of a live alert platform. The Vethrak formation slowed as it entered survey range, the outer edge of the system where a thorough sensor sweep could return useful data about what waited closer in. They were not hiding. They made no attempt at stealth, broadcast no signal, opened no diplomatic channel. They simply moved at their slow survey speed and swept the system with the kind of methodical passive scan that spoke of a civilization confident it was looking at something it owned. I watched them on the long-range display. 8 vessels in their old formation, patient and unhurried. The largest was perhaps 800 meters in length by our estimate, smaller than 2 of the 3 Accord capital warships now positioning themselves in the asteroid shadow. The others ranged from 200 to 500 meters. They were old designs, visibly so. Their hull profiles carried the angular asymmetry of ships built for function in a specific era and not significantly modified since. They looked like tools from a forgotten workshop, still sharp, still functional, but recognizably ancient. I spent much of that quiet time at my post in the observation gallery, which is not where a sniper first grade is strictly required to be during a live alert event, But Watch Commander Aln had cleared me for discretionary positioning, and I think he understood that standing at the long-range optical array, with the approach vector on the display, was where I could be most useful to myself. A sniper's utility in a diplomatic contact event is limited. What I could contribute at that point was staying out of the way of the people who had specific jobs to do, and maintaining the kind of alert patience that orbital platform work trains into you over 11 years, whether you want it or not. I thought about the archive entry. I had read it once, 11 years ago, and I read it again that morning on my platform display, standing at the gallery window with the approach vector feed in one corner of the screen and the archive text in the other. The Vethrak entry was 18 pages in its summary form and referenced 642 supporting documents. The core of it was this: 48,000 years ago, an unknown number of Vethrak vessels had entered the Sol system, conducted what the Accord's xenobiological reconstruction team described as a targeted biological modification event affecting the early human population, and departed. The modification had introduced specific genetic markers associated, in the Vethrak's documented enhancement methodology, with physical resilience, neuroplasticity under stress conditions, and what one of the supporting documents described as a self-reinforcing aggression and recovery cycle. In simpler terms, they had given us the capacity to be better fighters, to learn faster from physical damage, and to keep coming back. What they had not given us, the entry noted with the dry precision of a 3,000-year-old scholarly conclusion, was any of the things that made their enhancement deposit useful from their perspective. They had added the capacity. They had not added the willingness to be harvested. They had not added submission. They had not added the instinct to recognize the collective as an authority. In the Vethrak's recorded methodology, those qualities were typically already present in species they seeded: a social hierarchy, an existing tendency toward obedience to demonstrated power, a deference structure that the collective's return could slot into naturally. Early humanity had had none of those things in the form the collective needed them. The Accord xenobiological team's conclusion, at the bottom of the entry, was brief. The collective had seeded a species that used the enhancement to become something entirely outside the collective's harvest model. They had made us better at doing what we were already going to do on our own. They had just not been present to watch it happen. Their drones had been, though. The archive entry noted that the collective's passive observation network, automated drones in deep system orbits, logging data for pickup on the return visit, had almost certainly been operating throughout the 48,000-year interval. The drones had been feeding data to the collective's navigation archives at whatever collection interval the collective maintained. They had been watching us the entire time. I looked at the 8 contacts on the approach vector, and I thought about that. 48,000 years of drone observation, feeding data back to a cartel that had looked at the returns and classified us as a failed yield, because the data showed us fighting each other. Because the data showed cycles of conflict and collapse and rebuilding. Because a civilization that seeded worlds for martial yield had looked at our wars and seen waste, rather than understanding what the thing they were watching actually was. At 11:48, the Caliph Meridian made first contact. The intercept vessel broadcast on 43 frequencies simultaneously, in the reconstructed Vethrak contact protocol derived from the navigation transmissions we had found in the Dead Star's orbit 1,200 years ago, and in the 17 other contact languages maintained by the Accord's diplomatic archive. The message was standard Accord First Contact Protocol: identification, legal standing, statement of presence, invitation to respond on any open frequency. For 4 hours and 19 minutes, the Vethrak did not respond. They continued their passive scan. They had reached the inner boundary of the survey range by then, and from Caliph 6 I could see, on the long-range optical array, the image slightly softened by distance, the equatorial band of orbital platforms in its full deployment, The ring lit for the first time in my 11 years in something other than routine maintenance mode. 12 platforms, evenly spaced, each the size of a small city, their active status running lights burning steady white against the dark. Below them, visible to any long-range optical scan, the megacity skylines of the equatorial continent band stretched in their great curved towers beyond counting, the infrastructure of 10,000 years of post-accord construction, lit from inside and from the reflection of the ring above them. At night, from the distance the Vethrak Formation occupied, the inhabited curve of Earth would have looked like something that had been built rather than grown, like a world that had been worked on. Deliberately, systematically, across a very long time. Which was exactly what it was. I watched the display and I thought about what they were seeing. A planet they had classified, from decades of drone observation, as a failing yield. A species too internally conflicted to represent useful combat stock. And now, closing on survey range at their confident, unhurried speed, they were looking at an orbital defense ring, a fleet they could not yet see but whose buoy network would be registering on their sensors, and a world below that had no resemblance to the catalogued entry they had brought with them across 48,000 years. I did not feel sorry for them. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something closer to a cold, professional satisfaction, the kind that comes not from winning but from finding out that the preparation was real, that the thing you'd been told was in place was actually in place. When the contingency is 11,000 years old, and the asset it was written to protect is the world below you, the confirmation that the contingency is functioning is not a small thing to feel. From his station at the signals console, Darrett Allen had been running the communications protocols without pause since the first alert. He was 63 years old and had been at that console for 14 hours by the time the Vethrak began their passive survey approach. He did not ask for a break. He did not mention the duration. He sat at his station with the methodical precision of a man who understood that the work in front of him was what the preceding 39 years had been preparing him for, even if neither of us had known that until now. I watched him sometimes, across the operations center, in the long silences of the survey approach. He moved carefully, precisely, with no wasted motion. He had the translation system running 4 parallel parse threads and was manually reviewing the confidence flags on each one, making small corrections to the protocol parameters, maintaining the communication window in a state of readiness that would let him transmit or receive with no more than 3 seconds of activation delay. He had a habit, I noticed, of checking the archive reference links in the counter package at irregular intervals, not because anything was wrong with them, but because checking them was part of his standard of care. The work was the work. He did not distinguish between the routine maintenance of a quiet night and the live signals management of a first contact event. He brought the same hands to both. If you had told me, watching him work, that the moment of first contact in a 48,000-year alien return was in progress, you would have been describing what his hands were doing accurately. He was already there. He had always been there, in the way that a prepared person is always in position for the thing they have spent a career preparing to do. At 1607, the Vethrak lead vessel broke its silence. The message came in on the reconstructed contact protocol. They had apparently kept the same encoding across 48,000 years, or something close enough to it, that the Caliph Meridian's translation system achieved an 89% confidence parse on the first pass. I read the translation on my console as Watch Commander Alm read it aloud in the operations center, quietly, for the room. The message said, "Survey Formation Breed-War Collective 7 Keth 9. We are conducting a standard yield assessment on a catalogued cultivation site. You are operating in space registered to the Vethrak Collective under the Harvest Rights Compact, Tier 1 designation. Please identify yourself and state your authority for the installations observed in the survey zone." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone across the console bank let out a slow breath. Aln said nothing. He turned to Darret Alan. Alan nodded once, made a small adjustment to his console and said, "Ready to transmit on your order, Commander." Aln said, "Send it." The counter package had taken 47 years to compile, the last time it had been updated. That was its most recent revision, during the 400-year review cycle 7 years ago. In total, across the 11,000 years of its maintenance, 236 scholars, legal archivists, xenolinguistic specialists, Accord defense planners, and diplomatic historians had contributed to it. It was 412 pages in the current working summary. The full archive behind it ran to 22 million pages. It contained the following, among other things: a complete legal rebuttal of the Vethrak Harvest Rights Compact, citing its own text and the 17 separate revisions the compact had undergone in the 4,000 years after the collective's departure, none of which had included Earth because no Vethrak representative had been present to include it. A full accounting of the 48,000 years of Accord legal history, establishing human sovereignty over the Sol system and the surrounding approach corridors. A genetic analysis of the human population, demonstrating that the Vethrak's enhancement deposit had contributed less than 0.3% of the current human genome, well below the threshold for collective ownership claims under any revision of the Harvest Rights Compact. A record of the Accord's standing military force as of the current date, including vessel count, capital ship classifications, orbital platform specifications, and the legal authority under which the Accord Defense Force operated. And a formal statement, in the reconstructed Vethrak Contact Protocol, inviting the collective to withdraw under safe passage terms or to initiate a formal diplomatic exchange. The transmission took 11 minutes to send in its compressed form. The full archive was flagged as available on request. Then we waited. I have been in situations that felt like waiting, but I had never felt waiting the way I felt it in the operations center of Calith 6 over the next 11 hours. It was not fear. I want to be honest about that. Fear was not the dominant note. We had 290 vessels in the asteroid shadow, 12 orbital platforms at full active status, and the full weight of 11,000 years of preparation behind every piece of the counter package the Vethrak were reading. Fear was not what I felt. What I felt was something harder to name. It was the feeling of standing in a room that has been built for 46,000 years specifically so that you could stand in it at this moment, and understanding fully, in a way that lands in your chest rather than your head, that you are not the one who built it. You are only the one who gets to be here when it is finally used. There is a weight to that. A debt you can't pay because the people you owe it to are unreachably far in the past. I watched the Vethrak formation on the display. They were still scanning. Their passive sweep had shifted in the hours since the counter package transmission. The geometry of it changed, became denser, more focused. They were re-examining things they had already swept, reading specific structures in more detail. The ring platforms, the megacity profiles, the warship mass concentrations that the outer buoy network would be returning to them, suggesting a fleet-sized force somewhere in the inner system. They were recalibrating. I thought about what 48,000 years of drone observation had told them about us. Thousands of years of human conflict, rendered into data returns, formations, casualties, territorial shifts, the rise and fall of political structures, the recurring pattern of war and peace and war again. All of it logged, all of it analyzed, all of it reaching a cartel council somewhere in the collective's home system and being evaluated against their yield criteria. They had watched us and concluded we were too unstable, too internally directed in our violence, too resistant to the kind of external hierarchy they needed their combat stock to accept. There was a particular cruelty to that conclusion. Though the Vethrak had not intended it as cruelty, they had intended it as assessment. They had watched us for 48,000 years and seen only the surface of the data. The numbers of dead, the borders shifting, the same territories changing hands across the centuries. What their drones could measure, they measured. What their drones could not measure was the interior of the process, the doctrine passed between generations, the lessons built into the next generation's training cycles, the mistakes turned into curriculum, the disasters turned into architecture. Every military collapse humanity had ever suffered had produced, eventually, a reformation. Every reformation had incorporated what the collapse had demonstrated. Every war had refined the record we kept of war. The archive that the counter package was built on was not a record of our victories. It was a record of everything we had gotten wrong and chosen to remember. What the drones had not been able to tell them was what each war had taught, what each collapse had deposited in the archive, what each rebuilding had incorporated deliberately from the lessons of the fall before it. The drones logged what happened. They could not log what was learned from it. And what was learned across 48,000 years of practice, because that is what it was, whether we intended it that way or not, was deposited into the knowledge base from which the Accord had been built, from which the contingency plan had been drawn, from which the counter package had been compiled, from which the 290 vessels in the asteroid shadow had been designed, crewed, and positioned. The Vethrak had watched us train for 48,000 years and called it failure. At 22:18, Darrett Allen said quietly from his console, "Commander. Incoming transmission from the lead vessel." Allen moved to the communication station. I pulled up the translation feed on my own display. One word. In the reconstructed seed tongue, the old contact protocol, the encoding the Vethrak had apparently maintained in their navigation archives for 48,000 years. One word that the translation system rendered as impossible. No other text, no query, no counterargument, just that one word in the collective's own language on an open frequency, as if they had transmitted it not to us but to themselves, as if the commander had read 412 pages of legal text and 22 million pages of supporting archive reference summary, and the word had simply escaped. Allen turned to me. I do not know why he turned to me. I was a sniper first grade, not a diplomat or a legal specialist. Perhaps he simply needed to look at someone in the moment. I met his eyes and I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He turned back to his console. Signals, flag the Accord response fleet for reveal on my mark. Stand by. Allen said, "Standing by, Commander." At 22:31, on watch Commander Allen's mark, the Accord response fleet began its repositioning maneuver out of the Caliph deep shadow. 290 vessels, including 3 capital warships, moving in formation from the asteroid field toward open space on a heading that would place them between the Vethrak formation and Earth's approach corridor within 4 hours. The maneuver was not aggressive, it was not a combat deployment. It was a statement. It said, "We were here before you arrived. We have been ready since before you arrived." The asteroid shadow was not a hiding place. It was a waiting room. I watched the formation on my display as it emerged from behind the Caliph deep mass. Even on the tactical readout scaled and abstracted into contacts and vectors, there was something that hit me in a way I had not expected. 290 contacts, moving in the precise formation of a fully prepared and fully rehearsed force, unhurried, no scramble, no improvisation. It looked the way a prepared thing looks, inevitable. The Vethrak formation did not move. For 6 minutes after the Accord response fleet became visible on any passive sensor array in the inner system, the 8 vessels of Breed-War Collective 7 Keth9 held position without moving, without transmitting, without any response I could detect. They were looking at 290 vessels and 12 orbital platforms, and the blue-white weight of a world below that carried more megacity skyline per square kilometer than any planet in the archive, they had constructed across 48,000 years of seeding and harvesting. They were reading what 48,000 years had produced. I want to say something honest about what I felt in that 6 minutes. I had spent 11 years on Calith 6 watching the Earth from 680 kilometers up. I had seen it in every light and every season and every weather pattern, and I had never gotten entirely past the way it looked when the light was right. The sheer improbable fact of it, blue and white and turning, carrying 8 billion people and 10,000 years of megacity construction, and the orbital ring and the warship formations and all of it. All of it grown from something that 48,000 years ago had been a collection of small bands of early humans on a planet. A cartel had seeded the way you seed a field, and then walked away from. The Vethrak sat in their old formation, and they looked at what 48,000 years had produced, and they said nothing for 6 minutes. Then the lead vessel transmitted again. This time it was a longer message. The translation system took 3 minutes to parse it to the 85% confidence threshold, and Alan read it to the room in sections as each piece cleared. The collective's commander, the message was structured as a formal personal address, which the translation system flagged as significant, requested a visual exchange. 1 short-duration transmission, 2-way, voice and image. The message used the formal register of the seed tongue, the high diplomatic tier. It was not a demand. It was a request carefully worded. The commander identified himself by a designation the translation system rendered as Fleetseer of the 7th Yield Survey, and he addressed us as, the system flagged this translation as 67% confidence, the cultivated result. They still thought of us that way. Even looking at the 290 vessels and the 12 platforms and the world below, some part of their framework still processed us as a thing they had made, a thing that had grown beyond their model, but a thing that had grown from their seed. Alm considered the request for 40 minutes. He consulted with the diplomatic team on the Calith Meridian by closed channel. Then he approved the visual exchange with a set of conditions. 30 minutes, 2-way, the Calith Meridian as the human side of the channel, all content logged and retained. The collective agreed to the conditions immediately. I had the sense that they would have agreed to any conditions. I watched the exchange on a secondary feed in the operations center. The Calith Meridian's main cabin was visible on our side. The Accord's senior diplomatic liaison, a quiet woman named Sarat Ven, seated at a table with 3 colleagues and a translation specialist. She had the look of someone who had prepared for this meeting for a significant portion of her career, and was now in it, and was not going to waste a second of it on anything other than what needed to be done. The Vethrak commander appeared on the feed when the link opened, and I will describe him as honestly as I can, because I think it matters that the record contain a description by someone who was watching. He was large. The cabin behind him gave a reference scale, and he occupied it substantially. His head was not shaped the way a human head is shaped, broader at the back, tapering toward a central facial structure that carried what I could only call a military bearing, the set of a thing that has been built and used and knows what it is. His coloring was the deep burnished quality of old metal left in weather. He wore no obvious uniform, but his body carried what the translation specialist later described as rank marking integrated into the biological structure itself. The collective, apparently, bred rank into their warriors rather than marking it with cloth. He looked like what he was, the commander of a force that had traveled 48,000 years to collect something, and arrived to find the collection had made decisions of its own. He was quiet for a moment when the link opened, and I watched him look at Sarat Ven's face. Then he spoke, and the translation system rendered it. "How long have you known we were coming back?" Ven answered without pause. "Since the 3rd generation after your departure," she said. "We identified the modification to the genome in the 12th generation. We traced the origin. We located your navigation transmissions in the Keth-3 dead system 46,000 years ago and decoded them over the following 800 years. We have known you would return for 46,000 years. The Fleetseer was silent for a long moment. Then we watched you. Our observation drones logged your centuries. You fought each other. You fell. You built and fell and built again. We classified you as a failed yield. Insufficient martial discipline. Too much internal conflict. We discussed culling the site entirely and using the protein base for second-stage seeding. Vin said, I know. You fought each other for 48,000 years. We trained, Vin said. Her voice was level, the way a thing is level when it has been kept level through long practice. You watched us and saw a species that couldn't stop fighting. We are a species that couldn't stop training. The difference is not visible from the outside. The Fleetseer looked at her for a long time. I was watching his face on the secondary feed, and I could not read it with any precision. He was too far from human in his morphology for me to parse his expression the way I could parse a human face. But something in his posture shifted. A quality changed. It was not fear, I want to be careful not to project, but it was the posture of something that has just processed a piece of information that changes the weight of everything it thought it knew. We came to collect warriors, he said. Yes, Vin said, we know. A pause. Then, what stopped you from meeting us at the system boundary with those vessels? Vin considered the question. Because we didn't need to, she said. We needed you to see what we have. We didn't need you to be afraid of it. There is a difference. She let that settle. You are free to leave, Fleetseer. Your vessels have safe passage out of the system on the vector you arrived on. We ask that you transmit the record we sent you to the Collective's full council. We ask that the Collective not return to this system under any classification, survey, yield assessment, or otherwise. Those are not threats. They are statements of preference. You are free to make your own decision. And if the Collective decides to return, then we will be ready, Vin said. We have been ready for 46,000 years. We will continue to be ready. A pause. We suggest you look at the vessels behind the platform ring before you make that calculation. Not the number, the formation, the way they hold position, the way they moved into that position from behind the asteroid shadow. Another long silence from the Fleetseer. He was looking at something outside the frame of his camera, presumably a display of the Accord response fleet's formation on his own screens. Then he said, in the seed tongue, a phrase the translation system initially flagged as uncertain. It went through 2 revisions over the following hour before the diplomatic team settled on the rendering that went into the official record. The rendering was, we did not make you. We found the seed of you. Whatever grew, that is yours. Vin said, yes. We will transmit your record, the Fleetseer said. We will recommend against return. Thank you, Vin said. It was stated without warmth and without coldness. A receipt acknowledged, a matter noted. The tone of a conversation between parties who understand each other clearly and have nothing further to negotiate. The link closed at the 30-minute mark. The Vethrak Breed-War Collective 7 Keth-9 began its withdrawal at 23:41 station time, 4 minutes after the visual exchange ended. 8 vessels in their old formation, on the heading they had arrived on. They did not accelerate hard. They did not appear to flee. They simply turned and began moving back the way they had come, at their survey approach speed, as if the act of leaving was as unhurried as the act of arriving. I stood at my post in Calith 6's observation gallery and watched them on the long-range display until the contacts faded past the detection threshold at the system's edge. It took 7 hours. During those 7 hours, Darrett Allen suffered a cardiovascular event at his console in the operations center. He was found by the night shift medic at the beginning of the 100 rotation, slumped in his chair. His console still live, still recording the outbound telemetry of the Vethrak formation. The medic said later that he had almost certainly been conscious for some time after the event, and had chosen to remain at his station rather than raise an alarm. By the time he was found and moved to the platform's medical bay, he had been sitting there for an estimated 2 hours. He died 44 hours later, without regaining full consciousness, in the platform's intensive care ward. He was 63 years old. He had served the Accord Defense Force for 39 years, the last 11 of them on Calith 6. He had been at his console for 22 consecutive hours at the moment of the event, and had been the primary signals officer for every transmission in the exchange with the Vethrak Collective. He had prepared the counter package. He had kept the communications protocols clean across 19 hours of a live alien contact event that no one in human history had experienced before. The Accord's after-action record lists him as the only Accord Defense Force casualty of what was officially designated Contact Event Vethrak 1. His name is entered in the roll of the Accord Memorial Archive with the notation, "Duty completed." I have written those words 1,000 times in training logs, in assessment forms, in the routine paperwork of an orbital defense posting. I have never felt them carry the weight they carry now. I want to say something about what came after, because the after is part of the record, and the record is what I am trying to give you. The Accord's formal assessment of Contact Event Vethrak 1 took 8 months. The diplomatic teams ran the visual exchange transcripts through 47 different analytical frameworks. The Xenobiological Survey team published a 1,400-page analysis of the genetic trace evidence and concluded, with high confidence, that the Vethrak's enhancement deposit had been genuinely minimal, less than 0.3% of the current genome, as the counterpackage had argued, and possibly closer to 0.1% when the most recent sequencing data was applied. The conclusion the survey team wrote into their summary was carefully worded, as scientific conclusions tend to be, but its meaning was clear enough. We did not become what we are because they made us. We became what we are because we built it, generation by generation, over 48,000 years of making choices and living with them. The Fleetsier had been right in his way. He did not make us. He found something and left it alone for 48,000 years, and what grew was ours. I think about the watching. I think about the collective's observation drones, silent in high orbit across the centuries, logging the data that told them. These creatures fight each other and fall and build and fight again. A failed yield, insufficient martial discipline. They watched the wars and they saw waste. They watched the rebuilding and they saw inefficiency. They watched the cycles and they counted repetitions, and they concluded that repetition without progress is a species that cannot improve itself. They did not understand what they were watching. When a soldier runs a drill, she runs it wrong the first time and right the 100th time. When a formation trains, it collides and misaligns on the first pass and moves as a single thing on the 200th. When a defense force builds a contingency plan, the first version is incomplete, and the version after the 11,000th year of revision is something else entirely. Every conflict humanity fought across those 48,000 years taught something. Every collapse was a lesson taken in full. Every rebuilding incorporated what the fall had shown. We were not repeating. We were calibrating. The Vethrak watched a species that could not stop fighting each other and called it a character flaw. We were a species that could not stop training. The fighting was the training. The falling was the training. The remembering was the training. 48,000 years of it, and then we had the 46,000 years after we decoded their navigation records. After the third generation looked at the modification in our own genome and understood what it meant and what was coming, to refine what we'd already built, to add the legal architecture, the diplomatic protocol, the orbital ring, the fleet, the counter package, the contingency plan, the 11,000-year review cycle. They came to collect warriors. They sent observation drones across the centuries and logged the training and called it failure because they did not have a word in their seed tongue for what they were actually watching, a species practicing. I have been asked, since contact event Vethrak 1, whether I was afraid during those 19 hours. It is a reasonable question. I try to answer it honestly. I was not afraid of losing. I was afraid, briefly, in the quiet of the first hours, of something harder to name. The feeling that everything I had known about the world I lived in was about to be rearranged. That the weight of 48,000 years of what had brought us to this moment was going to become fully visible to me for the first time, and I did not know if I had the capacity to hold it. I had that capacity. Most of us do if we have been properly prepared, and we had been prepared. That was the whole point. That was the 46,000 years. Darret Allen had that capacity and gave what it cost him to sustain it. I do not know if he knew, in those 2 hours at his console after the event, that he was dying. I do not know if he knew he was choosing to stay at his post rather than raise the alarm. I know that he kept the console live and kept the formation telemetry recording and kept his hand near the transmit key, in case the Vethrak formation made a change in its withdrawal heading. They didn't. They left on the heading they came in on. He died the way a person dies when they have done the thing they set out to do, and the doing of it was the whole of what they had to give. Watch Commander Sareth Aln said, at the memorial service on the platform 6 weeks after the event, that Allen had prepared for contact event Vethrak 1 for 39 years without knowing that was what he was preparing for. That every signals drill, every comms protocol update, every 47-language diplomatic transmission exercise he had run in the routine of a long career had been aimed, without either of them knowing it, at the 19 hours of a single night on Calath 6. He said that this was true of all of them. That this was true of everyone in the Accord Defense Force, and everyone who had served in it, across the 11,000 years of Vethrak contingency planning, and everyone who had served before the contingency existed, and whose wars and falls and rebuildings had filled the archive that the counter-package was built on. He said, we did not know what we were preparing for. We prepared anyway, because that is what it means to remember. I think about the Fleetseer's last transmission. The phrase the translation team revised twice before they were satisfied with the rendering. We did not make you. We found the seed of you. Whatever grew, that is yours. I do not know if he meant it as a concession or an observation or something the Vethrak language carries that doesn't translate cleanly into either. I know what Sareth then said in response, and I think her answer was the right one. Yes, it is ours. All of it, the 48,000 years of fighting and falling and rebuilding and remembering, and building the ring and the fleet, and the counter-package, and the 11,000-year contingency plan, and Darret Allen at his console, and the 6 minutes of silence from 8 alien vessels looking at a world they had assumed was finished. All of it is ours. Vethrak went home. We do not know what recommendation the Fleetseer made to the Collective's full council. We do not know if they will return. The Accord's Planning Division added a new annex to the Vethrak contingency at the 400-year review cycle 6 months after contact event Vethrak 1, covering the scenarios in which the Collective returns within a generation versus a generation-class time interval versus a multi-thousand-year interval. The contingency is still in the active catalog. The review cycle continues. We will be ready. I stood at my post in the observation gallery of Calath 6 for 2 more years after contact event Vethrak 1, looking down at the blue-white weight of Earth turning below me and up at the outer system approach vectors and the quiet running lights of the fleet's outer picket line. I thought, during those 2 years, about what it means to be the person who is standing somewhere when a thing that has been prepared for 46,000 years is finally used. You are not special for being present. The preparation made you present. Everything that came before you made it possible for you to be standing there at the right time with the right console reading the right archive alert. You are the latest version of a very long process, and the most honest thing you can say about yourself is that you tried not to waste the position you'd been given. Darret Allen did not waste his position. He used it entirely. The Vethrak came to collect warriors. They found a species that had turned every war and every fall and every hard-won rebuilding into the material of a preparation so thorough that when the collectors arrived, all there was left to do was show them what 48,000 years of training looks like in practice, and let them make their own calculation. They made it. They left. That is all the story is in the end. 8 old vessels, a prepared world, a 19-hour standoff, one good man at his console until the last, and a fleet that was already in position before the visitors had sensors on Earth. No heroics, no last-second turn, no desperation. Just the weight of a people who had been paying attention since the 3rd generation after the collective left, and who had decided, somewhere in the deep past, that paying attention was not enough, and that you had to build on what you were paying attention to, generation by generation, without stopping, until the building was done. The building is never done. That is also part of the record.